step. You don't want to move very fast. You want to try to keep something between you and your target.
For decades, fans admired Tom Oar not only as the rugged star of mountain men, but as one of the last true American frontiersmen, someone who lived by his hands, his instincts, and a lifetime of hard-earned skill. But what happened just 1 minute ago inside the loft of his old barn has everyone from TV producers to longtime friends speechless. It wasn't an animal hide, an antique trap, or one of his handmade tools that caused the shock. What they discovered was something far more mysterious and far more revealing about the man Tom Oar has always been behind the cameras. When the small crew entered the barn, they expected to find dust, old saddles, maybe a few forgotten relics of his trapping days. But as they climbed the narrow wooden ladder to the loft, something immediately felt off. The air was different, thick, untouched, almost like stepping into a sealed time capsule. A single beam of late afternoon light stretched across the loft floor, illuminating what looked like a collection no one knew existed. And it wasn't random clutter. It was organized, protected, hidden. What lay in front of them wasn't just a few keepsakes, it was a secret chapter of Tom's life he never spoke about publicly. The items were arranged with care, wrapped in aged cloth, preserved like they mattered more than anything he'd ever owned. Each piece told a story he had chosen not to share, not even with fans who believed they knew everything about him. The discovery raised questions instantly. Why did Tom hide these items? Why were they never mentioned on Mountain Men? And what do they reveal about the life he lived long before the cameras arrived? One thing became crystal clear. This wasn't just a storage loft, it was the final, unspoken message of a man who lived more lives than the world ever knew. And now that the secret is out, the truth is impossible to ignore. For most of his life, Tom Oar's barn had been more than just a place to store tools or shelter animals. It was an extension of the man himself, weather-beaten, creaking with age, and standing firm against the Montana winds. The old structure symbolized years of survival, craftsmanship, and quiet perseverance. Outsiders often admired it during visits, but very few had ever been allowed inside. Even fewer had stepped into the loft. People assumed the loft was nothing more than a dusty corner, filled with scraps from Tom's trapping days. But on this particular afternoon, that assumption shattered instantly. It all began when a small group of Tom's closest friends and local historians gathered to catalog his remaining personal belongings. Tom, now spending more time away from the strenuous lifestyle of his early years, had finally given them permission to document what remained of his legacy. The barn was the last place on the property they had not explored. The moment the heavy wooden doors groaned open, a hush fell across the group. The interior was dim, the dust motes swirling in the shafts of sunlight like tiny spirits disturbed from their long slumber. As the team moved cautiously through the barn, they expected the usual things: old bridles, worn saddles, bundles of rope, crates of unused tools, and maybe a few pieces of equipment from Tom's early days on Mountain Men. But something about the atmosphere felt heavier, as if the barn itself was holding its breath. A narrow wooden ladder stood in the corner, its rungs worn from decades of use. For years, Tom avoided climbing it unless absolutely necessary. The loft, he had once casually mentioned, was just a pile of old memories, but nobody knew which memories he meant or why he had chosen to hide them away. When the first member of the group placed a foot on the ladder, the others instinctively stepped back. The wood groaned under the weight, but it held. With each step, dust trickled down like sand from an ancient hourglass. At the top, the loft appeared darker than expected, as if the shadows themselves had grown thick over time. The man climbing reached for the pull-string light, expecting the bulb to flicker weakly, but to everyone's shock, it turned on instantly. The loft lit up in a warm, almost eerie glow. The gasp that followed echoed through the entire barn. Instead of disorganized debris, the loft looked like a meticulously curated gallery of Tom Oar's past, a side of him the world had never seen. Each item was wrapped carefully in canvas, tied with leather straps, or placed inside small handcrafted boxes. A long wooden chest, its lid carved with symbols none of them recognized, sat at the center like a centerpiece. The air smelled different up there, not like dust and age, but like pine oil, leather, and something handwritten. One of the historians whispered, "This isn't storage. This is preservation." No one knew Tom had been this deliberate, this intentional, about anything beyond his tools and traditions. They began opening items slowly, not wanting to disturb the careful order. A small wrapped bundle revealed a hand-stitched journal, with dates so old they belonged to another era entirely. Another cloth unveiled a pair of intricately decorated arrows that looked Native American in origin. Yet no one had ever heard Tom speak of any connection to such artifacts. Everything felt personal. Everything clearly mattered to him. And everything had been hidden from the world. As more items came into view, a sense of awe filled the loft. What secrets did Tom carry all these years? Why did he choose to lock these away instead of sharing them? Even when the cameras of mountain men painted him as an open book, the deeper they looked, the clearer it became that this loft held a version of Tom Oar the world had never met. And this was only the beginning. The discovery of the loft had already left everyone stunned. But nothing commanded their attention more than the long, hand-carved wooden chest resting at the center. It was too ornate, too deliberate, too meaningful to simply be a place to store odds and ends. The chest was made of thick, aged timber, reinforced with copper brackets that had oxidized to a rich green. The carvings covering its surface were intricate mountains, trees, wolves, and a winding river. But the strangest feature was a set of symbols no one recognized. Geometric shapes intertwined with what looked like primitive markings. It didn't match Tom's usual style. It looked almost ancient. The group gathered around it in silent awe. They hesitated to touch it, unsure whether opening it was even appropriate. After all, this wasn't just an item, it was a secret, a deliberate one. The fact that Tom had kept this chest hidden for decades, tucked away in a loft no one was allowed to enter, meant it carried weight. Emotional weight. Historical weight. Maybe both. For a moment, they considered leaving it untouched. But curiosity, mixed with responsibility, compelled them forward. When the historian placed both hands on the lid, he paused. "If Tom hid this," he said quietly, "he had a reason. But he also allowed us in here today. That has to count for something." The group nodded, and with a slow, careful push, the lid creaked open. The sound was deep and heavy, like a vault door shifting for the first time in years. What lay inside made every breath catch. The chest wasn't filled with valuables or weapons or tools. Instead, it held dozens of carefully wrapped leather-bound journals, each tied with sinew and marked with a year. Some dates went back more than half a century. Others were so faded they were barely legible. One by one, the journals were lifted with reverence. They were not ordinary diaries. These were field logs, painstaking records of Tom's life in the wild, detailing hunts, seasons, weather patterns, animal behavior, and personal reflections. It was as if he had spent a lifetime documenting not just his work, but the changing heartbeat of the land. One journal, dated 1974, opened to a page with a rough sketch of a grizzly bear. Beneath it, in Tom's unmistakably steady handwriting, were notes about migration patterns and a close call encounter he never shared publicly. Another journal mentioned a winter so harsh he nearly lost 3 fingers to frostbite. He wrote not of fear, but of humility, how the cold taught him to respect the mountains more than ever. These were stories no television camera had ever captured. Then, tucked beneath the top layer of journals, someone uncovered an envelope. It was sealed with wax old, cracked, and brittle. On the front, in Tom's handwriting, were 5 words that stopped everyone cold. "For when I'm gone." Suddenly the loft felt smaller, heavier, more intimate than before. The historian holding the envelope looked around nervously. "Do we open it?" he asked. No one spoke. They didn't want to cross a line that Tom might have considered sacred. But the envelope was inside the chest for a reason. Maybe Tom intended for someone to find it when the time was right. After a long, tense moment, they opened it. Inside was a single handwritten letter, Tom's unmistakable voice coming alive on the page. He wrote about his fears for the future of traditional craftsmanship, his regret that younger generations were losing touch with the skills that once defined survival, and his desire to leave behind not just memories, but a responsibility. The letter wasn't dramatic. It wasn't sad. It was reflective, deeply personal, and incredibly honest. But the last line hit harder than anything else in the loft. What you find here is not for admiration. It is for continuation. Don't let what kept me alive die with me. The weight of those words echoed through the loft like a final message from a man who lived on his own terms. The group realized they hadn't simply uncovered artifacts, they had uncovered a mission. After the emotional impact of Tom's letter settled over the loft, the group continued sorting through the chest with a new sense of purpose. The journals were not the only contents. Beneath them, wrapped in layers of a quiet respect, filled the room as the group realized they were touching something that had survived generations of mountain men, each one adding their touch, their spirit, their survival to the wood. The bow was more than a weapon. It was a legacy Tom had kept hidden for a reason. As they examined it, the historian pointed out something curious. The symbols carved into the bow weren't random. They matched markings found in old Native American craftsmanship, specifically from tribes that lived in the Montana region centuries ago. How Tom's family came to possess such a piece was a mystery, but the quality and age of it suggested it was deeply significant. It might have been a gift, a trade, or even something entrusted to Tom's ancestors with an expectation of care. The discovery shifted the tone of the entire exploration. What else had Tom safeguarded? Near the back of the loft, hidden behind bales of hay and old saddles, they found a second trunk, smaller, steel-rimmed, and locked. Unlike the chest, this trunk felt resistant, almost protective. They hesitated before unlocking it, unsure what they might find. But when the lock finally gave way, the lid creaked open to reveal something completely unexpected. Dozens of tapes, VHS tapes, some marked with dates, others left blank, all stored alongside an old, dust-covered camcorder. The historian carefully inserted one of the tapes into a portable player they had brought for documentation. At first, the screen filled with static. Then an image appeared, grainy but unmistakable. It was Tom, decades younger, sitting on a fallen log in the middle of the wilderness. He looked straight into the camera, speaking calmly in that familiar, weathered tone. "Maybe someday," he said, "someone who loves this life as much as I do will watch these." What followed was astonishing. The tapes were not episodes of Mountain Men, nor were they staged recordings. They were raw, unfiltered footage of Tom's private life in the wild, everything from crafting moccasins to tracking elk, tanning hides, repairing tools, and navigating brutal Montana winters long before he became a television icon. But the most surprising recordings were the personal reflections. In several clips, Tom spoke candidly about his doubts, fears, and the loneliness that came with living a life entirely on his own terms. He talked about losing friends, the slow fading of the old ways, and the painful realization that the world was changing faster than anyone could adapt. One tape in particular left the room silent. In it, Tom sat beside a fire as snow fell gently around him. "If anyone ever sees this," he said softly, "it means I'm gone. But that's all right. I just hope the things I've learned don't die with me." Those words echoed the message from his letter. Tom had spent his life preserving traditions not for fame, but for survival, of skill, of culture, of identity. When the final tape ended, no one moved. The emotional weight of Tom's words seemed to fill the entire loft, thick, lingering, impossible to ignore. It wasn't just what he said, but how he said it. There was no performance, no camera-ready polish, no television persona. It was just Tom Oar, honest, humble, and carrying a lifetime of wilderness wisdom on shoulders that had borne more than anyone realized. But the exploration wasn't over. As the group continued searching the loft, they uncovered something that would change the way people saw Tom forever. It was a crate tucked behind several animal hides, so deeply hidden that it seemed intentionally placed out of sight. Unlike the others, this crate was sealed with thick rope, the kind used on traplins or pack horses. When they cut it open, a heavy smell of old leather and campfire ash wafted out. Inside were bundles of letters, hundreds of them, all addressed to Tom. Some were decades old, their envelopes browned and curled. Many were unopened, and every letter carried a return address from somewhere across America. Small mountain towns, rural homesteads, reservation communities, even major cities. Every sender had written for the same reason. Gratitude. Double quotes Tom One letter began in neat handwriting. You don't know me, but your way of life saved my life when I felt completely lost. Another read. I watched you on TV with my father every week before he passed. Those moments are the last good memories we shared. One envelope contained a photograph of a young man standing proudly beside a deer. He had hunted for the first time. The note inside said simply, "You taught me how." But the most surprising letter wasn't from a fan, it was from someone Tom once knew personally. The historian read it aloud, his voice trembling slightly as he unfolded the crisp, carefully preserved paper. It was from Tom's older brother, whom very few fans even knew existed. "Tom," it said, "I know we lost touch years ago. I know you went your way and I went mine. But I want you to know something. You were right. You saw what was coming long before the rest of us did. You didn't run from the world. You chose the life that made you happiest, and I'm proud of you." The letter ended with a sentence that made everyone pause. "If you ever need me, I'll come. No matter how long it's been." It was a reminder that behind Tom's quiet, rugged independence, there were stories of family, some painful, some unfinished, all deeply human. The discovery of the letters alone could have filled books. But there was still something else, something hidden beneath the crate in a narrow wooden drawer that blended almost perfectly with the loft's floorboards. It was only found when someone stepped on it and noticed a tiny shift of the wood. Inside that drawer lay the most astonishing item of all, a folded map. Worn to softness, patched with tape, and marked with dozens of tiny handwritten notes. The map revealed something remarkable. It charted not one, but 3 remote territories deep in Montana and Idaho, places Tom had ventured to for years. Each location was annotated with Tom's unique shorthand. Elk runs here, good winter shelter, spring water clean, beaver thick in July. But in one corner of the map, circled in faint pencil, were 2 words, "My final camp." Silence swept over the loft as the group realized what it meant. Tom hadn't just lived in the wilderness, he had planned for the wilderness to be his final home. The map was a farewell, a roadmap of a life he hoped others might learn from, continue, or at least understand. Then came the final shock. Tucked inside the map was a thin piece of paper with Tom's unmistakable handwriting. "If you're reading this, then my time has passed. Don't mourn me. Do one thing for me instead. Go outside. Learn something real. Keep the old ways alive.